everyone. I'm Gemma Star, and welcome to another episode of Manspeak. Manspeak is an offshoot to our Heart Warrior series where some of our Heart Warriors come back and have a whole episode chatting about things that are dear and close to their hearts, things they're passionate about, embodied in, and full of wisdom. Today's guest is the return of our number 24 Heart Warrior, and that is Sacha Stone. Sacha is an amazing truth ambassador, a builder of the New Earth Sanctuary, as a divine poet, and full of enlightenment, wisdom, and lots of inspiring stories. So thrilled to have Sacha here, and we'll be talking about all sorts of things. So really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for joining us. Hello, Sacha Stone. How are you today?
Flustered, as you can see, and broken out in a light sweat because I was panicking to get here on time, and then I couldn't find my computer charger, and then but it's all good, thank you. All in the zone. Getting to be a late night here in Yucatan.
Oh, awesome. Well, I think today we can just roll with, whatever comes up in conversation. I've got a few points that I thought would be good to bring up. The first one I thought I'd like to touch on is that a lot of people, even if we're not going through pain and suffering ourselves, we're witnessing it around us in our loved ones and in the community at large. How do you rationalize pain and suffering as part of the human journey?
I suspect that it's just the foundational element in the contrast that the unconscious projects into the field in order for the conscious to be known to itself. Meaning to say that pain, suffrage, is the cornerstone of the trial of separation. Whether you're talking about physical pain, the pain of menstrual cycles, the pain of childbirth, the pain of a broken bone or terrible headache. It's all kind of connected to that singularity. Or if you're talking about psycho-emotional pain, the torturous pain of grief, of loneliness, of the broken heart. All of that stuff, as we learn, do we not, in life, becomes the vital element in evolution, in us evolving the texture and the fabric of our morality, of our spirituality, of our lives. So it becomes, in that sense, something which we have to embrace to the point that we've become actualized and fully conscious, whereupon we're no longer able to suffer. One is not able to feel that kind of pain when you're in a state of unified consciousness or bliss. Of course, it disallows for the contrast in that sense. A heightened state of consciousness and spiritual awareness leads directly to that emancipated perspective where everything is perfect, always, in all ways, at all times. Because in a sense, you're beyond the grip of time, and you're certainly beyond the grip of illusion of believing that this love affair from which I suffer a broken heart is the great love affair. No, that's a totem, that's a mirror, that's a part of the progression toward understanding that the beloved is a full realization of self and a relationship with self. So just to say that suffrage and grief and pain are very valid, vital, and necessary stepping stones toward that emancipated state of being. And one must never identify with suffrage or with pain and believe that it's the end of the line. This is the cul-de-sac. This is the journey. This is the destination, because it's not. And that ghastly saying, time heals all wounds. If there was ever a value to time, or something that one could in a sense elevate with the notion of time, it would be that time in that sense absolutely does heal. But that's because the fiction of time embraces the fiction of loss and the fiction of grief. And
thank you. Awesome. What do you think happens to us when we pass from physical death onwards?
Well, in a sense, I'm not too interested in what I think, because I don't follow the machinations of thought. I would never sit and think about it. But if one feels one's way to that answer, to that truth, by entering into, in that sense, the death state or deathlessness, and deathlessness is a withdrawal from the fiction of life. And that's a systemic process that one has to begin, which is where meditativeness comes into it, or doing advanced breath work or yoga or any form of spiritualized discipline can help bring one to that point of surrender. So pure surrender in that sense in your spiritual discipline should lead you to the state of death in that sense, living death. Many masters have extolled for many centuries the virtue of dying before you die and learning the craft of dying before you die, precisely in order to disenchant the ultimate fiction of death and not be afraid of it and not apprehend it as this great terrifying blanket of doom or darkness that's looming at us, but to actually ultimately to assimilate death as the greatest fiction, even greater than time itself. And what I'm driving at here, Gemma, is immortality or immanence. And that is the ultimate gift that we bequeath to ourselves in an enlightened state of being. Go to the Burmese valleys, go to the Tibetan highlands, and you'll find that there are a great many masters who are amongst the so-called immortals. I've certainly brushed against three of them, different lineages. One in North Africa and Morocco, one in Burma, and the other one in India. It's in central India. And these immortals have, to some lesser or greater extent, mastered the fiction of time and the fiction of death. So they're able to extend life somewhat limitlessly. Certainly the one immortal is well over 1,120 years. I think it's 1,123. I, in my lectures, show photographs of this incredibly blessed being who only comes out once every couple of years from his space in the valley in Burma and performs the darshan for a few people who are brought before him, and he stands in a mercurial fire. The fire of ultimate transformation, isn't burnt by it and steps out of it. After that, gives the blessings and then retreats, and he looks extraordinary. I'm just illustrating the fact that there are amongst us the immortals, so to speak. Margot Anand, my beloved friend and the great famed tantra master, who's turning 80 in summer this year, and I hope to join her in the south of France for her birthday celebration. But Margot Anand has been with the immortals and gone and stayed and learned the song of the immortals with them, and came back some years ago, about 10 years ago, to Bali, Indonesia, and did that incantation for me and for a science group that I was working with at that time. And we watched her. I certainly saw her in front of me blink out of existence for about 40 minutes. And that was an extraordinary event, in a sense, the most extraordinary thing I've seen. What I'm getting at here is that we have to disidentify from this reductive idea of life, death, black, white, up, down, good, evil. We have to disidentify from it because none of it actually applies in the quantum. Gemma, you're going to have to excuse me. I have to get my PA's charger for her computer. I'm using her computer and I can see the batteries going down. Hold the line 1 second. Don't go. just in the last few minutes. She'll
Yes.
she's just bringing it in. Thanks so much. We're all good. We're all good to go. Nice. Where do I stick this thing? Is it around the other side or this side? It is there. Great. Done. Yep, we're on. Thanks so much. All right. Boom, boom. That took us almost a minute. Right. Let's go.
Awesome. Yeah. So
let me cap this off and round this off. Death is the ultimate fiction. And death is the ultimate fiction, and it's also the ultimate kind of firewall of cogitation, of consciousness, of cognition, of witness, or so we think, which is why one can't think the answer that you asked me, to the question you asked me, precisely because you cannot think your way to the answer. So you have to be in the death state, in a sense, which is deathlessness. To be in the death state is to understand the deathless nature of death. So therein lies a fantastic paradox and conundrum, but it is actually the Sufis' mystery. And it's important that we, each of us, one way or the other in our lives, begin to align to that foundational truth, that foundational riddle. And in so doing, activate our superluminal state of being, which takes us now into the so-called ascension spiral and activates the atomic, cellular, molecular matrices within the 3D mortal template. And now I know that that is why we were born to this end of time, you and I, our generation, anyone aligning to this conversation and witnessing or participating in this conversation and resonating to it, absolutely know what I'm talking about. If you feel that you were special when you were born in this time, that's because you were and you are, because we are part of the regenesis of the superluminal angelic human that is anchoring the patterns of perfection into this mortal plane of existence during our lifetimes. Finally, before so-called Stargate closes, which it is doing, and eviscerates, annihilates this entire material plane of existence. And with the supernova event kicking off in 2046, well, good luck, baby. We're all fucking toast, until or unless we've activated that noosphere. And in so doing, anchored the entire mortal plane of existence into its ascension spiral. That's where we're at. That's why we're here. And certainly we need to prepare ourselves for it. So the business or the matter or the subject of death per se becomes utterly moot, irrelevant, and one ought to not even acknowledge or concede it in a sense. And that's because where the mind goes, the body follows. So whereas 10 years ago, 50 years ago, a century ago, 1,000 years ago, it may have been nigh on impossible for the average mortal to be able to conceive of immortality in so-called flesh. Now it's becoming the prerogative that we were born to, and we sense it, we know it. We know that the human biotechnology, our physical frames were designed to last for thousands of years, certainly for many centuries. And that death at 70 years and 10, in that sense, is about the most absurd and illicit event. But it occurs because we have been downgraded and downshifted through cultural engineering, civilizational engineering, genetic engineering. And yes, that's been an agenda set by lower elemental forces and incredibly powerful forces from the cosmos, who, by our subliminal unconscious permissions, gain traction into this earth plane and into our genealogy. And we then allowed for the interposition or intervention of the idea of time to be birthed through the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican complex, the blood conquest, the wars of old. So it's all part of this underpass of the grand procession of the equinox, a galactic sleep cycle, a passage of sleeping about 13,000 years before we break in through the photon band, which we've just done, and we're in the process of doing now, and move into the galactic day, another 13,000 years, which describes this 26,000 year grand precession of the equinox. But there is a day semi-arc and there's a night semi-arc, and we've been in the underpass, the night, the great sleep, so to speak, for the last 13,000 years. And in that descent, or that fall from grace, and that's what we refer to when we are, in a sense, reflexing to the psycho-civilizational PTSD from the great deluge, the flood, the Noah and the Ark story, that apocryphal story that is written into all the great narratives and myths and legends of all cultures and traditions, because it happened wholesale to this entire earth plane about 31,000 years ago. So that was the end of the kind of Lemurian Atlantean legacy. And then the great deluge, the reset, a few survivors drifting around, reseeding in different parts of the globe, and then a slow, steady descent into the nadir point, the lowest point of that precession of the equinox, and which was about 6,500 years ago. And if you looked at that point of the great collective death, you'll find that was probably round about when the moon became active and appeared in our orbit. I'm not sure that the moon was around before 6,500 years ago. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm saying I've not seen any evidences that it was in our orbit older than 6,000 years ago. Not on cave paintings or petroglyphs or any of the Sumerian scrolls or ancient Enui Elish, writings of the ancients. I haven't seen any. And in those old sky charts and maps from the Bushmen of the Kalahari to the Aboriginals in the dream times, we don't see the moon up until about a few short thousand years ago. Then all of a sudden, it's represented pictorially and symbolically in charts and maps and cave paintings. So what gives? It becomes and don't think you can pick up the phone to the Royal Geographical Society or the Royal Astronomical Society to get the answer, because you're not going to get it from those sons of bitches and the Discovery Channel. That's the problem we've got. We don't get the correct information. So much of it's sequestered from us. And so because of that, I'm slowly getting to the point of finally answering your question by saying that I'm describing why it is that we have this monstrous psycho-cultural, psycho-civilizational PTSD, this kind of trauma connected to death. It's because we've been in a 13,000 year death spiral. And it's all been about death and blood and gore and battles and wars and then resurrecting. But interwoven into that is another narrative of the golden age, which was also cut off from us and which has also been erased from our memory as recently as 150 years ago. Of highly emancipated elements of our emergence, which were then thrown back into the dark ages by Sabbateans, invisible masters, Babylonian priests, as recently as the 18th century and the 19th century, with the mud floods and the bleaching out of the Grand Tataria, the resetting of the cultural and psychocultural mapping of who and what we are as a species. So that's why death becomes this grave subject, because it's the ultimate reflex. We don't want to be pulled back into another state of forgetfulness. We only want to affirm now and to emerge and evolve and lean into revelation. So let's do that, is my point. Let's just lean in to the bliss and the revelation, and therein and thereby begin the process of transmuting every cell and every atom in our bodies, firstly, and then that plasma field that naturally, or auric flaming that occurs with the Christic heart, the Christed heart, the awakened heart, acts as a morphogenetic upshift for those around us and for the trees and the plants and the clouds and the oceans. And that morphogenetic flaming that will then occur with more and more of us moving into the natural organic unfoldment of revelation is the very quanta that activates the noosphere, and that then reconvenes the divine umbilical between heaven and earth, and the return to Eden, so to speak.
I love what you said about the heart there, Sacha, the Christ at heart. Can you expand on that, and just for people who maybe think it's, a beautiful physical pump, very efficient, what are the metaphysics around the heart?
I'm no expert on that. And folks like Dan Winter, who I would naturally turn to invite him to go into a very deep kind of descriptive of the machinations of the human heart. My own emphasis in my own inquiry into pure truth, as I put it, is not being focused on the human heart. As you know, it's been focused on the psionic center, the gut instinct, the place which first bifurcated cells in our mother's womb, at inception. That to me really is the atom seed. So I always want to go back to that. And one imagines that atom seed of the first splitting the first infinitive of the first cell, that was encoded in that, obviously in the DNA, there was the heart and the mind, but for me, as heart and mind have emerged as the kind of twin flame of consciousness and of actualization, in the process of being a sentient creature that then self-reflects and becomes conscious of being conscious, which is what separates us from being a rabbit. That describes a beautiful conjugation of the heart and the mind, which is to say the vertical and the lateral. But for me, it's not the vertical or the lateral or the heart or the mind that is of that much consequence when we consider the epicenter of the cross between those two planes. And it's that epicenter, which is the seat of witness, the throne of sentience, so to speak, the throne and the seat of witness, that I am most peculiarly passionate about, because I have, to some extent, experienced the extraordinary grace that issues from seating one's consciousness in that psionic center, and not allowing oneself to move too much into the heart. And again, I don't really want to get too much into the conversation that tends to upset people, especially women, who have a general tendency to be the caretakers of the planetary heart. But I'm defining a new journey and a new comprehension or understanding of what it is to be human. And I can only speak in truth from my own journey, that my heart is wonky, and my brain is wonky, but my seat of witness is absolutely still. And so it's the place I speak from with the most confidence.
Yeah, no, I love that. And
we could talk about it. I'd love to discourse on the heart and be kind of challenged on it if you want to.
Well, I've always seen it as, we spoke in another episode of the balance of masculine and feminine within the individual. And I see that as the masculine mind and the feminine heart. And that point of witness is, what you described, that you see in yourself as being the 50-50. How does that sound?
Well, I don't see it as being 50-50. I think I probably intimated in the past that I see them both as conjugating each other out of existence. So it really for me is about negating. It's about the heart being in such a state of fulfillment, and in a sense the genius of consciousness and of the mind, the TikTok, of also being in such a state of a fulfilled state of being, that they cannot be anymore. they blossom fully, the heart. I know that I love with such an absurd degree that I'm, as a middle-aged man, which in a sense is ridiculous and somewhat pathetic, although it's not. I shed tears on a daily basis now. This is absurd. And it's not that I go and sit behind a tree and sob. It's not that. I mostly wear sunglasses because I shed tears throughout the day. And don't ask me to stop, because I cannot. I'm having problems sometimes, even when I'm on a stage and I'm talking a certain subject. If I start talking about war, if I start talking about human trafficking, if I start talking about ritual satanic practice and blood rites, if I start talking about the abuses of against children in their mother's wombs, in households, being beaten up and being shouted at by angry drunk partners, and the horrors that afflict and assail the unborn child. If I start to put my conversation, my focus there, my heart literally starts to explode with this entirely unreasonable force. And then I cannot contain my normal emotional responses and start moving into this meltdown. I have to keep pulling myself into kind of warrior mode and really like keep doing this throughout every day. It doesn't matter where I am. And getting on an airplane, traveling across an ocean, I am going to, in that 10 or 14-hour journey, I am going to be shedding tears probably 3 to 5 times. I know, because I've calculated it. And I thought, what is wrong with you? And it's I can be looking at someone on the plane, and then one moves into empathy. One attunes one's psionic frequency, which is so powerful, to someone's suffrage. And you can see by the indentation under the eye here of the suffrage of that human, that woman, that mother, or it could be a child who has an abusive father, or it could be an old person who's journeying to see their family for the last time because they know if they're coming to the end. And so I will, through the empathic waveform, which issues from the center, I will hit that attunement. And then in that attunement, I'm going to read the alpha omega of the pain of that individual. Now, any good empath is going to do this, incidentally. It certainly doesn't single me out as being anything rare, except for the fact that I can't contain it and I can't stop it. So I'm at a point now where in a sense, I have to be a real cunt in my life in a given situation. I have to be really quite hard in certain situations and hold myself back and be a little brittle in certain situations, because if I'm not, I know where it's going to go. This relationship will just lead me into completely exploded heart, and I'm going to be a mess, and I won't be of service to these people in the situation, like in Sudan, where I was just a couple of weeks ago, and I was investigating the child trafficking there, and I was trying to get close to certain people in certain situations on the ground, in the homes and in the places where the old people were dying and the young children were kind of mutilated and deformed. And I was moving amongst them and sniffing and smelling and using my empathic waveform. And I managed to hit into a couple of the prime culprits. I read the energy forms of these adults who were the caretakers in these institutions, and I was horrified. And then I did have to go and excuse myself from the group and go and bang my head on a mud wall around the corner and just pull myself together, because I know what I see in plasma. Any good empath does. But yeah, the point I'm trying to make here is that this is the reason why I pulled back from the heart, because my heart is so filled with this capacity to love everyone to the maximum, which I believe, incidentally, is our prime directive. So I'm not suggesting that that's not a good thing. I'm just suggesting that I'm not evolved enough to be able to handle that and then still function in a way that is of service or relevancy in the function of what I do in this world, which is building spaces and attending things and public speaking and making films and interviewing people and trying to bite the ankle of the parent corporation. All the shit stirring that I do, I need to be a little bit aggressive and a bit of fire to be able to do frontline activism, for instance, or to go and beat up municipal governments or federal governments or police or cartels, whatever I'm dealing with in my humanitarian advocacy and human rights advocacy and my aggressive activism. I have to be able to function as a warrior. Well, I couldn't do that, Gemma, if I was being me in my true skin, in my heart skin. I couldn't do it. None of it. I'd literally be in a pool of tears from the moment I opened my eyes and saw the first stranger walking down the street, because I'm going to read their pain. So I've learned to fill my heart to the max, to the absolute maximum, until I'm on the brink of erupting into just sobbing limitlessly. And I've also filled my mind. So my mind is super, super active. And I'm constantly working, as anyone around me knows. All of my crews know that I just never, ever, ever stop. And I've got limitless capacitance and limitless energy, limitless amounts of fire to apply to different things and be in different spaces and challenge different things and always be in a state where I'm looking for remedy, solution, and appeasement, in whatever it is that I'm doing. So that's me having a very filled mental space 8 days a week and having a very filled heart space 8 days a week. But how am I actually functioning? It has to be from a space that is neither that nor that, because if it was just that, I would go into meltdown, either give myself a brain aneurysm or go psychotic because of way too much RAM overload, or the heart thing, same thing. So I've learned through force of will to fill the heart, fill the mind, not negate them, not go into denial, which I'm accused of by some women who don't get from me what they want from me in relationships. And I've had this for 25 years. Oh, you're a man child. You just haven't resolved no, actually, I'm there. I've been there for a long time, really present and really able and fulfilled and able to connect. But I can't do it if there's a shadow element, if there's sexual jealousy is the bed partner, is the third leg to the stool, then it's never going to happen. That conjugation will never happen, because my energy form is just too damned alert and awake to be able to withstand that constant assault. So I've learned to just put myself in the throne or the seat of witness, the psionic center, and not negate and not filter out my feeling or my thinking. I hope that answers the question in a ridiculously long-winded way.
I totally get it now. Awesome. Thank you. And I get that. It makes complete sense. I'm interested in enlightened relationships, as what you broached on here. What do you see the purpose of, two actualized people, a man and a woman, coming together in relationship? What do you see the purpose and the goal of that?
Well, again, that's going to offend at least half of your viewers, but here goes. It is what it is, what it is. And as I've mentioned in conversation with you before, the great calamity and fallacy of human love and human male-female love and betrothment is that it's a fiction, it's time-coded, and you have to reflect on the fact that you have incarnated thousands of times, not just in this realm, in a great many different realms, but let's just talk about this one. How about that? Let's say you've incarnated 300 times as a human being. I don't know what the average is, but it's probably around there. Well, I guarantee you, 99% of the time you have fallen in love. and you have found your mate or your twin flame in those incarnations, and you have pledged eternal allegiance to them. So are you suggesting that in 300 lifetimes you always met the same soul partner and pledged allegiance? No, you didn't. You met with different aspects of the superluminal Atman, of the ultimate unified beloved, the Godhead, which is you in your perfect reflection. So we just have to kind of get smart and just put ourselves in check a little bit and get a little bit grounded in this silly business of love and go, I really, really dig you here and now, and I'm with you here and now, and I'm conjugated to you in the here and now, and not get silly about it and daffy about it, because that's undignified. It doesn't carry much grace to it. As I said, all reductive, stupid, familial creatures get very defensive about their loved ones, about their kin. Blood is thicker than water, all of that crap. But to answer your question, male and female love is the ultimate tool of navigation in the mortal realm towards self-realization. It's the ultimate trajectory or path toward relationship with self, because as you fall in love and then lose the beloved through grief, you are left with a perfect miracle of self reflection. You can only then fill that space with self, or you commit suicide. Okay? Or life is unbearable. You have to fulfill that void in the silence. And every blessed older person who's listening to this, and I fucking lean in and embrace and love anyone who's lost a partner, you know, especially the more elderly people, you know, who have spent 20, 30, 40, 50 years with their beloved and then have woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning to discover their husband or their wife, their beloved, dead beside them. And that happens to more people than you can imagine. And the horror that that brings in an instant, the loss, the grief, to be stricken with that degree of grief is literally immeasurable. And yet we have to sustain it. I have suffered a grief in my life that was so great. And the only thing you can do is dive into the emeraldine depths of sorrow until you reach the bottom of that place of utter despair. And once you touch the bottom of that emeraldine ocean, in honor, open your eyes, look about you. You're deep, deep underwater. You're all on your own. There is nothing there, not a pulse, not a sunbeam, but you know where you are. You know that you've arrived at the nadir point of utter grief and sorrow and despair. And yet you're still breathing. You're still breathing. So what do? Push off the seabed and you start to drift. And you drift. And you drift. And then through the laws of attraction, you move back toward the light, and you can see it glimmering at the surface, and slowly you drift back. And then as you break through the surface, you bring in the air, the oxygen, the ethers, resuscitate you and revive you and bring you back. And friends and family lean in and come around with cakes or flowers or whatever. And slowly we resurrect from that depth, from that utter grief. Point I'm trying to make is that when you're in the heartland of despair and grief and sorrow, your beloved is not. The beloved is in the counterpoint geometry at that point, in a state of unified field, heavenly realm, bliss, absolute quantum ecstasy. The lower elemental aspect of their nature may still be earthbound for a short time, normally about 24 weeks, through the devacanic states and what have you. It's normally about between 20 and 24 weeks, that they're bound, earthbound still, and can to some extent interact and see and hear and feel that, and they're oftentimes trying to minister to us and help console us. And I can tell you that the more we can lean in to their counterpoint bliss state and become actually aware of it, if we are truly able to love, then we have to conjugate ourselves with their bliss and know that their journey is ecstatic, and that we will conjugate again if we choose to, which we often do and will, and let it go. But you see, the point I'm trying to make here, again in my roundabout way, is that betrothment between a male and a female in the ultimate expression can only ever give rise to the ultimate grief, the ultimate state of stricken grief, abject desolation, sorrow, and loss, until or unless we have begun the process of mastering the pure truth of the beloved, of love, of connection, which is to be entirely intoxicated, wrong word, entirely immersed in that love and in full clarity, not filtering anything out of that perfected state of love, but at the same time disidentifying from the toxicity of attachment in that space of so-called love. Because as we know, and most people who are in love are not in love. They are in tremendous fear. They're in fear of losing the one that reflects back to them their self-worth, the one that validates their sexual majesty and prowess, the one that, you look at your partner and think they're so beautiful. Surely, if they're with me, I must be valid, worthy, beautiful. And so it becomes a self-affirming feedback loop, which, if that were to disappear, would destroy our self-worth and our dignity, our pride. Yeah. So it's important that one is disidentified sufficiently to be detached from that toxic and illusory element of so-called love, but to be fully unfiltered and connected in the being here now with the beloved, recognizing always that the beloved is the universal thematic, it's the Atman, it is actualized self. When we look to the greatest masters and greatest avatars of the ages, whether we're talking about even more sullied characters and yet important ones like Mahatma Gandhi or Krishnamurti, any of the great Maharajas and Maharishis and saints and sadhus and masters, alas, alack, 95% of them are male, which attests only to the patriarchy of our civilizational wheel. But there have been a great many female avatars and saints and sadhus as well. But if we look back at each of these characters in our cultural history, we never look back at them as though they were a pair, one of a couple. It's always, no, that's Sri Sri Aurobindo. Yeah, the mother was there, but no, it was Sri Sri Aurobindo. It was Gigi Krishnamurti. It was, Jesus the Master. It was Siddhartha Buddha. So this is also a crushing irony, is that the fully realized avatar or prophet, enlightened being, is never conjugated with a partner, really, not in the echo of time. Because the fully conjugated and realized avatar, like Moses, the great prophet Moses, was the fully feminized patriarch. So the mother and father, brother, sister, sun, moon, male, female, had alchemized as the mercurial caduceus into the being of that great prophet, which is what then activates the psionic intelligence sufficient for them to be able to prophesy and see through the veil, so it's a self-fulfilling kind of technology.
Yeah. Now, just to expand on that, because I was thinking that like for when we're not as conscious, we maybe get together with people for security, for survival, for sex, for companionship, a whole lot of reasons. But for people who are highly conscious, what is it purely to find that moment of now and presence and connection that you were talking about? Is that the ultimate goal of higher conscious relationships?
Well, I can't speak to higher conscious relationships because I've not, in that sense, exercised higher consciousness relationships. And when I'm thinking in terms of higher consciousness relationship, I think in terms of myself and Maharaj Sharan Singh Ji, my master when I was a youngster. I think in terms of Otis Lee, another great master that I was blessed to live and travel with when I was in my late teens. And I think of those are relationships of heightened consciousness. The relationship I have with my mother is for me a sacrament, we squabble and growl at each other in the same way that all people do. And I don't see nearly as much of her as I should or would like to, but I regard it as an elevated relationship, because most of the relationship is contained in the empathic field that we just fucking love each other desperately, and that's a beautiful thing, and that's never changed in all these years. So that for me is a conscious relationship, is the relationship I have with my mum. And relationships with women, and God knows I've had many. Can genuinely tell you, I have loved every single one of them, absolutely, to a fault, and my lovers, to a fault. And I think that's been, in a sense, the not the undoing of many relationships, but I think that that has maybe made it very difficult for some women who have loved me, and I'm loved by many women, to feel that they are or have been in the past sanctified enough individually to be able to view me as being the ultimate. So I end up becoming the net loser, ironically, of that scenario. This is the way I see it, and I can only speak to that. But so let me round off by saying, I don't know the answer to the question, because I am not that individual, because I have not yet been able to exercise that. And I'm certainly in the process of observing now, today, what's in front of me in life, and wanting to exercise that higher state of love, connection, and individuated focus, and what have you. Because although I have described myself as being polyamorous, the crushing truth of the matter is I don't get laid. And I just don't. And it can be a year or two can go by when I have almost no connection, and that's not what I want. I'm a pretty sensual, passionate guy, and if I had my way in life, trust me, I would be, having sex 7 days a week. But it doesn't play out that way in my life. The relationship that I have with self, the relationship that I have with the mission that I'm deeply attached to, is such that I am kept moving and on the front foot constantly. And that's been a great inhibitor to being able to find one's individuated kind of love space, sex space thing. And I don't have one night stands. I can't have one night stands. I'm not capable of them. I'm not capable of picking up a phone to a prostitute, even if she were a 19-year-old, gymnast from Moscow. Not interested, thank you. Not in a million years. I have had in palaces in North Africa and the Middle East where I've been guests of honor of royal houses. I have had harems, and I've had young, beautiful women sent to my chambers. I swear to you, on more than a dozen occasions, I have never partaken. Never. In Morocco, famously, there amongst the noble families that knew me at the time, I would have these stunningly beautiful young girls sent to my beautiful compound at midnight with a gentle tap on the door, just to keep me, the special guest, company through the night. And I got to a point where after the fifth or sixth time one of these beautiful girls had been sent to my room, and I was only 29 or 30 at the time. I was a youngster, I was in my prime, but I could not, even in those situations, bring myself to bear myself onto a young woman, even although I was beautiful at the time, and a good-looking man. I wouldn't do it, didn't do it, even the girls that wanted to. And then on one occasion, one of my hostesses came to me, a great noble woman, and she said, "Sacha, dear, is there a problem? We noticed that the girls have been saying that, you're not really interested in them. Do you want us to send you a boy?" I was like, no, please don't send me a boy. The point I'm making is that I'm not capable of one night stands. I'm not capable of fucking someone just for the sake of it, even although I like the thought of that, because I've got a pornographic mind, like most men do. I love the idea of big-titted Brazilians hurling themselves around, strippers' poles, but as part of a cartoon fantasy of demystifying the enigma of sex. So the average man, who would never admit this to you, incidentally, does have caricature sex going on in their head, which is porn. Because it's just caricature, it's stupid. It's like a cartoon strip. So although I've got that going on in my head, it has never been able to translate into real time in practice. And I've loved that about myself. I love that about myself, that I've never fallen victim there. I've never turned into the sordid aspect of the male, because that's the bit that I really, I don't want to say despise, but I really pity. When a man, especially a middle-aged man like my age, starts to go there. And I love beautiful women, who doesn't? But and I have lovers, but I need to know them. I need to get to know them. And again, that doesn't happen nowadays, hardly ever, if ever. So it's almost a moot conversational point. But yeah, I haven't even been able to pick women up in my life. I think it is true for me to say there's only one occasion in my life that I ever followed a woman and tapped her on the shoulder in order to have a conversation with her, because she was so enchanted me so much. And this is going back 20 years, that I actually had to follow this woman and tap her on the shoulder. And she's still an integral part of my life to this day, that woman. Integral part of my life. But I've never chatted a woman up, gone and chatted. I'm desperately, pathetically shy. I don't go to clubs anywhere. I don't go to bars. I don't loiter around hotel lobbies. At conferences, I always go straight back to my room. I'm pathetic. I did the same thing when I was in rock and roll. The guys would all go up, get trashed, get laid, get stoned, until 6 in the morning, and I'd go straight back at 11 p.m. to my hotel room, lock myself in. It's just pathetic. Anyway, my alter ego, again, is a deviant little ghoulish guy that is getting laid, 7 days a week and constantly out there. Yeah, but that's the caricature.
What a great insight into you. Thank you, Sacha. I love it. I love it. Let's talk about you manifesting big, because all these projects that you're doing. You've got New Earth Sanctuary, you've got innovations going on in Romania, you've got things happening in Sudan, you've got humanitarian, so many things. How do you manifest so big? And make things happen?
Well, curiously enough, it's really deftly connected to what we've just been talking about. So my theory on this, or my notion of this, is connected to the fact that one has a great deal of sexual energy, okay? One has a great deal of kundalini rising, so to speak, which is to say life force, which is seeking to be projected into the field in order to be the catalyst for manifestation. So if it is true, and I could be very faulty about myself, but I do know it's by and large true that in the last 7 odd years, I've had very, very little sexual engagement. And again, not because that's what I wanted, but because that's how it's played out. Prior to that, I was pretty busy. And prior to that, I was busier, and going back to one's youth. But now it's a different game altogether. And I'm so purposed again toward my mission. And don't ask me to clarify or quantify or even circumscribe what that mission is, because I couldn't do it. But it's something to do with being as alive to the moment as I can possibly humanly be, in a state of affirmation, leaning into the depravity of this world, leaning into the false light of this world to the greatest extent that I am able to, in order to be a custodian and a steward of this world, and to take all children as my children, to take all women as my bride, as my wife, as my into my custody, to take all men as my brethren, as my fellows, as my compadres, to revere all elders as my master, as my grandmother, as my grandfather. That's where I positioned myself as a being, and it's probably why I am so blessed to receive so much unbearable love from strangers and kindness from strangers, which vastly outweighs the trolling and the hatred and the rocks at the head and the slanders that come at me. Vastly outweighs it. I think it's because I am authentic in positioning myself as that. But what is the force that drives that and constantly seeking? It's the need to seek remedy. So although I'm slower in things than I would like to be, I'm constantly forging new initiatives. In Sudan, where we just came back from, with my friends who I was with there, we're now slowly circumscribing an initiative called the Circle of Life, which is connected to birthing and dying of babies and old people, impoverished Africans in North Africa who are born to this world with nothing and who die in fetid squalor. And I'm now slowly formulating the Circle of Life initiative, where we can bring the birthing and the dying into the same spaces, build these gardens and create the facilities, which will be dirt cheap to do in places like Sudan, and start to dignify the newborns and the dying people into a state of just as much joy and easement and beauty and sensory delight as we can. These people who've been in squalor and in war. So I am absolutely committed to making that happen. That's an insanely big objective to be doing on top of everything that I'm doing. But I'm going to do it. And it may take 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months to formulate that initiative and pull together the resources and get the money together to go and turn the key on it. But we'll do it. And then the films and the research in that, and launching various series. I'm just about to launch a new series with Scott McKay with white hats, because it occurred to me recently that I probably have more dialogue and connection to white hats than any man alive, and I have a duty of care. So I started phoning them and their agents and saying, can I please now bring you on a show to start disclosing some of, what you've been, intel dropping to me for the last X years. Can we start to now bring your faces and names a bit more into the public domain? So I've been having those arguments with some of them, and some are relenting. So I'm planning to be pushing the envelope on that, because I genuinely think it's important now that the good scouts and white hats start to actually, some of whom are in uniform, others who are retired, and others who have never been in uniform, but they're part of the, that echelon. I think it's important that they all now put heads above the parapet, and we see how many of them there are and how powerful they are and what their ranks are. It's fascinating. So that's a whole new endeavor and enterprise that with Scott McKay, I've asked him if he'll join me on that, and do a kind of bi-weekly show that's going to be very intense. And we're just formulating that as a kind of new, the White Hat Revelations series. Again, that's an insanely difficult and time intensive project to be undertaken. On top of that, I'm building 1,000 acres of new earth sanctuary here, which I intend to be the most progressive, evolved, conscious, and stunningly beautiful bio-architected, spatially harmonic, built environment on the face of the earth in the next 5 years. And it's what I'm doing here right now with our beautiful team, and buying more land, and this is master planning, and it's going beautifully. It's a huge undertaking. Dear God, I should simply be doing that and nothing else. But I can't be that man. I have to, and I know it's frustrating for my team here. Every 2 weeks, I'm on a plane. Bye. And then I'm going to be in Bucharest. I'll be with the technologies and the military engineers, and I'll be working with them. I'll be on a plane to somewhere else in the Gulf or the Mediterranean. Or, I haven't been back to my own home for 1 year coming up next week. 1 year I have not been back to my own home, where my clothes are, where my shoes are, where my big, beautiful bed and my big fucking feather pillows are, in my beautiful palace in Bali, where my 2 poodles are getting chubby because they're being overfed by my staff and it's driving me insane. Well, I've got beautiful home, beautiful business, beautiful staff there. I don't know how many of them are there, about 30 or 40, maybe 50, but a lot of people, a lot of mouths to feed. And I love them and I miss them, and but I've not actually physically been able to go home for a year because of the work I've been doing. And I don't know when that's going to abate. I'll be honest with you. I think it's likely to continue for a while. I'm just about to launch this week. I'm being urged to do it this week. I'm going to try and push it to next week. The Regenesis microbial formula that we've been working on for 1.5 years, and I'm so excited about that. So that's it's out of the lab and it's bottled now, and it's ready for the pre-orders and the fulfillment. So I'm super excited about that. And there are other technologies and formulas. I've just announced to the world, through my Lazarus symposium yesterday, or on Saturday, forgive me. Yesterday I was at a conference, keynoting at a conference in Tulum. I got back late last night. The day before that was the Lazarus Symposium, which I broadcast for 5 or 6 hours or something like that. And I announced in that and introduced Dr. Anca Maria Niculescu, this incredible medical scientist and research scientist who is for modern man. And I'm blessed to be the man chosen to work with the general and Bruno and Dr. Anca to bring this to the world and to raise the finances and to get it into production and fulfillment. Like, great, and I somehow have to do it. And I will. And that's a full-time job for 12 people. But I've got superhuman energy for sure. I'm blessed by the gods to have these incredible things coming in, technologies and remedies and formulas and solutions. And so, yeah, we just keep moving, don't we?
Yeah, it's amazing how many things you are putting together. So, but I want
well,
to.
Let me just say, Gemma, that's the fodder for these motherfuckers who love to call me a crown agent or a Vatican agent or my daddy's Rockefeller or someone related to Rockefeller. All those evil things that are said about me, because I think that people find it hard to pin down, a trickster like me. And for sure, I'm a trickster in that sense. I inhabit that kind of archetype. I don't know what it is, a self-realizing manifesto or something, but that energy of being able to move like Quicksilver and get to a lot of different places with the same velocity at the same time, that's just a unique characteristic that I share with a great many people in the world who don't have a public profile or any kind of outreach, but are in their own lives. And there's some of them listening to the show are like, absolutely bang on. He's right. That's me. And those people are in 23 different areas, in study and research, in work, in play, and they don't get any credit for it. But they are that same archetypal character, and they're doing amazing things in their ecosystem. So the problem with characters like me, archetypes like me, is that we can end up becoming a jack of all trades and a master of none, which was what my mother's caution to me was when I was 16. And she, hauled me into the kitchen and said, now look, don't you dare become what I think you're going to become, which is a jack of all trades and a master of none. And she said, you will never be a policeman, you'll never be a teacher, promise me that. And I've become a jack of all trades and a master of none. Well, I think I approach mastery in one or two areas, but I'm hoping that and I've certainly set myself to the task that in the next decade, I'm going to absolutely become a master of all the things I engage.
Yeah, I have no doubt. Sacha, what do you say to the men and women watching who are just like, yeah, I want to do all this stuff that Sacha's doing. I want to be there and building new earth and humanity and, innovations and all the new things that are coming. But they just they can't grasp the grandeur that you've got. Like, how did you even start to contemplate new earth, and what advice have you got for those people who want to do a similar thing to what you're doing, obviously their own spin on it, but they just haven't got the manifesting skills?
Well, to answer the second part of the question first, I would say just do it, because you can, and because you must. Just do it, get on with it. But in terms of having evolved a uniquely resonant and grounded kind of pitch at manifesting the new earth vision or mission, you have to factor that I've done a quarter of a century of hard graft. And when I say a hard graft, I mean seriously hard graft. And as I've said, I think to you in the past, I only really acknowledge myself for having unbearable stamina and the capacity to shake myself down, dust myself down after I've been shot in the face, beaten black and blue, betrayed unbearably by loved ones and by entrusted directors and entrusted compatriots, which has happened so many times to me. And having all of my wealth stolen from me by people entrusted with the keys to my castle. That's happened on multiple occasions. Having intellectual property stolen, websites stolen, the whole thing. So I've had awful trials, and all of those sons of bitches will be justifying to themselves why they did what they did to me. But the soul rot will get to them eventually, certainly in the next 2 to 3 years, and they'll be facing very dire consequences at the soul level, because that's how it naturally plays out. And I know that the geometry, in that sense, the karmic geometry is always perfect in all ways. So I'm always good about that, and I don't wish harm on anyone. But I have been butchered by people I have trusted and loved with all my heart, and so you have to be prepared. What I'm saying, to answer the question, in the first part of the question, is you have to be prepared, in a sense, for a Herculean odyssey. You have to be prepared to lean into the flame, and to lean into the wind, and into the icy cold wind, for limitless periods of time that seem like an eternity. So if I cast my mind back to 1997, when my heart broke, shattered, and I went into the Christed death, resurrection, shamanic rebirth, survived what happened, slowly reassembled. It took me 2 years before I could walk and talk in my skin again and be somewhat normal. And in 1999, when it all came in, having sat in the desert floor in North Africa, in Marrakesh, and observed a piece of geometry for long enough called the breath of Allah, the compassionate. It's an intersecting squares piece of geometry, which fell off a 1,000-year-old pillar in this 1,000-year-old palace in Marrakesh, where I was staying with the royal house as their guest. And this mosaic piece from this ancient palace, huge, in a courtyard with the lime trees and the orange trees and the birds. I was sat there for weeks in the sunshine in that courtyard, just bringing myself slowly back into form, and, being loved by my beautiful friends in the royal family and connected to the royal family. Just beautiful people who helped nurse me back for months. And sitting in that courtyard that day when I begged the gods to give me a sign, as we all do when we reach that point of absolute exigency, like being so urgently in the present. Which is why I oftentimes say, and I end most of my lectures these days with a slide that says, if the prayer is fashioned aright, it'll be answered by the God in your own heart. Because that's what happened at that moment, sitting in that courtyard of the Royal Palace in Marrakesh. And as I asked that, a piece of geometry of an ancient 1,000-year-old mosaic fell and landed where I was seated. And I picked it up. And it was that size, and it was a perfect intersect of these two squares and a kind of ancient, forest green, bleached green and ivory colors. And I took that with me, held that with me. And weeks later, when I was back in London, I started studying the geometry of that. I learned that was the breath of Allah, the compassionate, in the ancient Sufic traditions. And then I learned about what that meant, and that took me on a journey, and that became the genesis point of Humanitarian, and the logo of Humanitarian came off that, and that led me, literally opened up every door to me, to Nelson Mandela, to the Dalai Lama, even to Henry Kissinger. In those days I was tapping into everyone powerful, and everyone was opening doors to me, and now I realize some of those characters are the very worst. But the point is, it didn't matter whether I was dealing with the devil or the angel, doors would open for me. And because I was possessed, and no question about that, with an angelic zeal. And that resurrection process took 5 years, where I traveled the world and met with all the mad mullahs and the zealots and the imams and the terrorist leaders and cultural leaders and spiritual leaders and political leaders and academic leaders. And in 5 years, I kind of synthesized this compression of international leadership sufficient for me to go, okay, I actually can see now somewhat beyond the veil and what construes the human story, the ABC, the alphabet of the human heart. And then I felt qualified. 5 years of non-stop travel, mostly in the deserts and strange remote places, and having guns at the head and being hijacked with Kalashnikovs on camelback. And I mean, all sorts of bizarre shit that I've got photographs of, but didn't have video cameras in those days. So alas, I lost so much good footage, which would have been fantastic today. But nonetheless, and that's taking me back to, 2003. And that was 5 years in. That's 20 years ago. And in the last 20 years, what I've been through is just unbelievable. Unbelievable. 2005, I first got involved in the planetary redemption with the White Hats and with the Kings of Kings and with the Solomon's Key and the Holy Grail and being, having people like the Dove of Oneness, the architect of Nisara Gisara, fly in to meet me in London, in Heathrow, albeit she would never step out of the airport, so she wouldn't touch British soil. But she flew into England to meet me and to impart certain knowledge to me. And I was entrusted as long ago as that, at that level of the critical architects of redemption and of where the world is heading today. And then all the rest of the shit up to the poisoning in 2016, which was the last great attempt to kill me and failed miserably, albeit made a fucking mess of me and my life for 3 months. But the point I'm making is those people who want to forge the mission, just know that you have to marry it. You have to be betrothed to it. And it's not easy. It's fucking hard. And it's impossible. Had I even for one moment imagined, I remember in 2003, 20 years ago, I remember sitting in a cafe in West Hampstead with someone who's still very much in my life today, and she'll remember it. She does remember, because we've spoken about it recently. And I said to her, darling, do you remember 20 years ago, we were sitting in that cafe when I was exasperated. I was beyond fatigued with how much I'd been through to get to where I wanted to go, and yet it still wasn't manifesting. The new earth wasn't manifesting. I was exasperated that day. I was almost going into an apoplectic fit because I felt I'd been on the longest journey and it still hadn't manifested. And she said, yeah, I remember that. I remember that, how desperate it was. And I said, you realize that was 20 years ago and it still hasn't manifested. And I've still been on the front foot 8 days a week and never stopped with the zeal. And then we looked at it and said, well, what's changed between then and now? The journey's just as impossible in a way, just as fraught, just as diabolical. And the rocks that you have to walk over barefoot are jagged, and your feet bleed, and your soul screams. And yet, there is a beneficence with this emergent field of light that I speak to always in interviews now, because that is me praying, and that is me meditating, and that is me kneeling before the Master Jesus, and kneeling before the one God. That is me kneeling before the Anointed One. That is me kneeling before the fellowship of man and the angelic hosts. Is my foundational recognition of the emerging field of light of the grace of God, which is impacting our plane of existence now at an incremental rate, and that fills me with such luminescence and joy and power and bliss and limitless creative energy and life force, and with it all the protections that one could ever wish for. So that's what's different today from 20 years ago, even though 20 years ago I was desperately exhausted from the trail I'd been on toward the new earth. So if you can find that within yourself, and that's my answer to the people who ask the question, if you can find that bliss peak wave, as Dan Winter calls it, despite all the horrors of life and all the pain and suffrage that assails you, then I think you are ready for that journey to pioneer it. And if you resonate with what I'm saying, and you're infused with that same grace by hearing what I'm saying, then for sure you're ready for it. So back to Nike, just do it.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I can really feel the energy coming out with that story, and obviously witnessing myself, in these past few, months, let's say. Sacha, is there anything else you'd like to say now before we wrap up about your projects? I wanted to ask you, I know you just went to a summit on the weekend about the 0 point economy. What is that?
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Well, it was actually a bloody good talk, and I was just extolling the metric that I am now architecting and engineering here and in Bacalar Laguna in the Mayan Riviera in Mexico, where we have taken on the most stunning land holdings you can imagine, a mountain with the biggest pyramid in the district, which are 100 hectares, which we're just closing on this week, which I'm so excited about. And hundreds of hectares of a laguna front, and beautiful, beautiful jungle, Mayan jungle, leading up to that laguna front, where we're placing the prime headquarters and a lot of the residential. So I'm looking to build, it was 350 up to 500 residential homes in the New Earth Sanctuary, and the New Earth University campus, and faculties will be housed between the pyramid land, which is 15 minutes inland, and the laguna land. And we're looking at other land between to create the New Earth Village. So 7 minutes drive between the pyramid wilderness retreat area and the laguna front. I'm really looking now just to continue to expand this vision. We've got a lot of investors and micro investors lined up. Many of them we'll select for the next 3 months in a kind of queue system. But we're staffing up right now so that we can onboard a lot more, a lot sooner. I don't want people waiting 2.5 to 3 months to speak to the sales team for the land banking, because I've opened up a land bank so people can take their money out of bank accounts now, which is going to disappear, or be turned into central banking credits very soon, and you will not see it again, and you certainly won't be able to move it. But if you land bank now in what is the best prime land in the Americas, which is the Mayan Riviera where we are, and we've got limitless land and options on that land, and it's arable land, it's stunning land. And the point is, you'd never need to see or touch it if you don't want to, but you can land bank with us. You can put money in to the land banking. You get a return. We offer a return on your money. We're collateralized by the land that we own and the resources that we own and the technologies that we own, including our free so-called free energy systems and all the wonderful stuff that comes out of our Romanian military engineering group, which is all being plugged into this project as the expo, the planetary blueprint and exemplar. So we tick all the boxes, and we're inviting people who are sensible enough to want to put their money and some of their money into the land banking. Even if it's a smaller amount of money, we're prepared to take it and then offer a return. It has to be locked for a year. You can then choose different options. You can either then parachute it in to take a piece of land and rebuild a new earth home on that for you. So you've got that as a means of income moving forward, or just a piece of land that you want to sit on and hold and hang on to until you build a retirement home, or you ask for your money back with a return. And so we're creating a situation which is a kind of Noah's Ark for people and for their money and resources. And it makes a great deal of sense. It's been beautifully conceived, taken 1.5 years, cost me an absolute arm and leg personally. I don't mind telling you to set it up. So I only exposed myself to finance the trust and set everything up. And we've got a team of 23, 24 people. It's growing almost on a daily basis right now. I estimate we'll have 75 staff before the end of the year, because we have to keep teaming up. And I mean core staff. I'm not talking about cleaners, and drivers. I'm talking about core. So we're growing very fast, very quickly, because I'm anchoring the kingdom of heaven on earth in a place which is where the rainbow serpent energy has now landed, descended, and it's doing its magic. And those who know me and know the story of the New Earth Sanctuary here in the last year will know that there's a lot of mystical reasons why this is the right place. In any event, people can go to newearthbacala.com. You could kindly put that out to people. So if they want to plug and play or look in on what we're doing, they can. But we're also building life pod and regenesis retreats, spa retreats throughout the sanctuary, deploying our Tesla frequency technologies, the life pod technologies, and our formulas, microbial formulas, which are about 300 years ahead of anything else on the face of the earth. That much I can promise you. But we have to do that within a private members enclave. If visitors come in across the threshold into our jurisdiction, then we can dispense and we can heal. And it doesn't matter what it is. I don't care what it is. I don't care how bad the condition is, how terminal. That is essentially what we're doing in the heart of the New Earth Sanctuary, is the regenesis clinics, spas, and then obviously centropic agroforestry and acres of greenhousing powered up with our own energy systems in order to get the cost of food down to zero within 3 years is my intention. and the cost of utility and the cost of food, I want to be at zero within 36 months. I believe we can do it. It's not a promise, but that's what we're aiming at, and which will mean that there will be no cost of living. Once you're plugged into this place, you will only be part of an abundance, evolving, affirmative, expanding economy, which is actually the basis of a zero-point economy. But there will be no costs, and that's what we are as a unified group seeking to manifest, albeit in a place of exceptional beauty, with bio-architected, bio-resonant, spatially dynamic homes and facilities and common parts and botanical gardens and animal sanctuaries and wildlife sanctuaries and wilderness trails and horse trekking and laguna, kayaking and beaches. So it's all here. And there's a reason why I chose it and it chose me.
I would argue that 20 years later, you have manifested heaven on earth.
We're getting there. I'll tell you that much for nothing. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Sacha. It's been amazing. Really enjoyed it. So many things have come up, and yeah, I love everything that you're doing there in Mexico and Romania, and definitely giving you totally my support and love.
Well, we look forward to welcoming you here, my darling girl. Greatly.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Much love.
Now you've let the secret out. I was keeping it a secret. Oh, awesome. All right. Thank you, Sacha.
God bless you, darling. Bye-bye.
All right. Lots of love. Bye.